Welcome back to Close Mode. And we've been having a fantastic conversation about strategic negotiation. And this is step 3 in a strategic negotiation process. We've gone through part 1 of estimating, part 2 of signaling and validating, and now we're moving into how to create value. Because like we talked about in the last episode, strategic negotiation in the beginning can seem a lot like really solid sales methodologies, like a challenger sale. But where a strategic negotiation process starts to really shine is on the back end. Because while most people negotiate based on price, like you said, Brian, where we really should be negotiating at the end is still around value. But now that I've been listening to this and I'm seeing all this work happen, how do you actually create value based on all this information you're learning from the buyer?
So the funny thing is people do think about negotiation as dividing value, who gets what. Right. And the negotiation goal we prescribe for almost any negotiation is create joint value and then divide it. And there's a piece add on the back end, given concerns for fairness and the ongoing relationship. So if you're in France and the Olympics are coming there and you're selling hot dogs, divide it in that sense. You're never going to see these people again. But and so in negotiation, you can continue to create value. And we'd much rather, the reason we want to do that is it's easier to get deals done when there's a bigger pile of resources to be developed. And the first 2 steps we did were starting to give us some of the data we need to be able to do that. And you do bigger deals, right? When you continue to create value. So the easiest way to think about creating value, let me give you the simplest way. Never, ever, ever negotiate one thing. That's zero sum. We talked about that in the last segment. If someone's talking to you about price, if we move up on price, or we move down on price, we lost a little, they gained a little. We didn't create any value. We shifted value from one party to the next. So the simplest way, very tactically, to create value is, and everybody knows this, but if organizations systematically did this, someone with 500 salespeople around the globe had all of their salespeople trading versus conceding. Conceding is, oh, you want a lower price? Here you go. I'm going to give it to you. Trading is saying there might be a pathway to that lower price. Can we consider lengthening the contract?
Yeah.
Can we consider increasing the volume? And again, that's what we're estimating up front. What are all the commercial terms? So we can now begin thinking about trades in the signaling and validation stage. We ask them, of all these commercial terms, how do you rank these most to least important? Not what number do you want? Because we're trying to look for if this, then that trades. And I think most sales leaders know intuitively we should be doing this. I'm telling you, it's the biggest impact on margins. If your salespeople move from conceding, and when you do concede, if I concede to you, I just told you I've been lying to you on the other number that I gave you. If you tell me, hey, Brian, it's got to be this, I'm like, all right, fine, we'll move to that. It meant I was lying. I mean, it's actually a trust. It hurts trust a little bit, where customers do appreciate. I had someone at one of the major beverage companies in America located in Atlanta. After going through our work, I asked her for something and she said, there might be a pathway to that. Can we consider? And I was like, yes, that's exactly. I think I was asking for references or something, and I think she got coaching sessions back from us. And I was like, okay, cool. That works. So that's the simplest way. There's a slightly more exotic way. And it's the way you present your offers. So the first thing I gave you is tactically, we're in dialogue, right? We're pinging back and forth, shooting bullets at each other. But this is a little more strategic focus for presenting your offer. And what most of us do is present our offer. And here's our price and here's our offer. And the sort of human psychology of that is the other side, 90+% of the time is going to say, I want that thing cheaper, right? That's just what happens when you put one offer. And I've got to tell you a quick story. When I started my first consulting firm, I started it with Max Bazerman, who was then the vice chair of the Harvard Project on Negotiation. And so Max is pretty good at this whole negotiating thing. And after the first year of our business, I looked at how our value is being divided. And it wasn't horrible, but Max had negotiated himself a pretty good deal. And I was very nervous about going and negotiating with this guy because I was still a baby consultant, hadn't written any books. And so we had lunch and I talked about everything under the sun other than this. And at the end, he said, I got to be getting back to class soon, and kind of rocked back in his chair, And I said, well, okay, Max, I'm not making enough money here. And imagine professor, frizzy hair, beard, and he kind of strokes his beard a little bit after I said, I'm not making enough money. He said to me, so you want some of mine? And what was interesting
Yeah.
about that is he just schooled me. I was calling myself a negotiation consultant. I broke that rule of never negotiate one thing. All I did was move money back and forth between Max and I. Max said to me, hey, I have an idea. Why don't we think about restructuring our agreement where you actually take less cash flow? And I'm thinking, see, you're like, I came up here looking for more money. And he said, you take less cash flow, but take more of my equity. And then there was something to do with the amount of time he was allocating to the business. Or here's another one where you take more cash flow, but some of your equity shifts with me. And he gave me three options. And he knew, like most times you present these, I couldn't do the math quickly enough. My alternative was the existing agreement. And I was trying to calculate those against the existing agreement. And he said, all right, of those three, and I quote, he said, of those three, which offends you least? And I said, believe it or not, the one that offends me least is the one where I take less cash flow and more equity. And he said, so you value long-term equity more than short-term cash flow? And my answer to him was, yes, absolutely. And I didn't know that until you just played this little game with me. What was this little game? And he was like, these are multiple solution options, right? So I gave you three paths forward. They act as a sensitivity analysis to your interest. You racked them and stacked them for me. And then he and I co-created a fourth, which is typically how these work. So if you want to go into it, there's two pieces to these, which is titling those and then putting the commercial terms under them. But at the outset, coming up with three, using that as a sensitivity analysis, and then co-creating the fourth, either in this meeting or you go back to your office and do it. But these are not off the shelf fruit baskets, small, medium, and large. These are kind of custom made based on this deal.
So to kind of circle back on what some of these criteria are, like I was just trying to think through, like, okay, if we can't just do price because it's just back and forth like you had with your business partner. He's like, so you want some of mine. So we have to throw some other things on the table. And I was like, okay, so what else is on the table? It might be price, might be features, might be service packages, might be users within a software, might be contract length, volume, time, training packages. There's so many things.
Yeah.
So if you just sit down and unbundle everything, how many things do you have?
Yeah. You want to get it down to the key ones. I mentioned this in the last segment, right? There might be 20 commercial terms to agree on, but you should know at this point, after you're estimating and validating, who the key players are, what are the key areas of the decision process, and what are the key areas of commercial terms where there's going to be a lot of pressure. And so we want to whittle it down to the key commercial terms. But the two part of building these multiple options, one is titling them. And then the second part down below is the commercial terms associated with them. And those commercial terms, by the way, you just mentioned 10, they all fall into two buckets, risk and reward. Every time you move on one, if I get a higher price, I got rewarded and the customer got unrewarded, right? If we take a limited liability clause and shift some risk to the customer, volume, length of contract, all these things are shifting risk and reward. So it's an easy way to think about the commercial terms. As one side assumes more risk, they should get more reward. So a high level for building out the commercial terms, titling of these things is so important. Let's go back to—
Tell me about that.
We know what their most likely alternative is. We should at this moment have a sense of where we're meeting some of their business goals better than that alternative. Or even if we're not, like we talked about before, what we want to punch that's really important to them. The title of these are always based on the impact we're having in the customer's business, right? I have one of my customers that sold to a big chip manufacturer, and they sold software and tools that help reduce defects and do all this other stuff. And when they titled theirs, the first option would be defect reduction of I, yield of Y. And then the next one would have a different one. And the third one would be more tactical. So these are always titled as it relates to customer business impact and hopefully things that are important to the customer. And if you can get to the parts where you have an edge, like if you can increase yield or reduce defects better than somebody else, then bam, that's your title. So think about titles as branding the it. The it is not the price of your product. The it is the value of a business solution and how you meet needs at higher confidence and lower risk than some alternative. We've got to state that and brand that thing.
And this is in the contract.
Well, this is usually in the proposal stage. It's the fourth one you
Oh, in the
co-create.
proposal. Okay.
Yeah, the fourth one you
Okay.
co-create ends up in the contract usually.
Okay. So,
But
but
yeah,
in the proposals, you're titling things, and I mean, marketers talk about this all the time, where you don't want to spell out features, you want to spell out benefits, right?
yes,
And in your case,
yes.
I think you're even talking about even more than benefits. You're talking about the outcomes that they told you were the most important to them.
Yeah, yeah. Like we're in the negotiation business, and so we might find out early on that moving margins is a really important. We had one client that communicated to Wall Street and the investors that the margin was going to hit a certain level. So we looked at what we could do to help them in deals to make their margins better, and one of the offers was called 4% margin increase. Right, that was the business impact. And then let me show you the products and services that are included to get to that goal. And then let me show you the terms and conditions. So there's three aspects to these offers. It's the title, based on something that's very important to the customer. And then what part of our solutions are we putting in this package? And what do the commercial terms look like? Now we have another one, Dan, where we might only be able to get to a couple points margin, but the solution's a little skinnier and it's cheaper. And then we have this really tactical thing on the back end, which is the bare bones usually that they've asked for. And what happens when they've asked for that bare bones looks terrible compared to the other two options. And what we see more often than not is the first one is the most robust, like the biggest thing we could ever hope for at the highest prices. They usually don't take that, but they move. The fourth version is more like the middle, where we've usually moved them up from that tactical buy to a more strategic buy.
Yeah. So you've given them a good, better, best offer at the end, customized for them,
Yeah,
where good is probably the cheapest option that they're and the price point they're hoping to hit. But
yep,
obviously, it doesn't have everything they need, and you know that because you've taken the time to estimate it, you've taken the
right,
time to validate it,
yep.
and now we're creating value based on that. So, which is how we get out of price mode and go into value mode, so that we can push them up the value ladder.
Yep. And it's back, if anybody's thinking, oh my gosh, how long does this take? We've modeled this for telephone salespeople, right? Where before the call they think through, they ask some questions, and it could be, all right, let me call you back 10 or 15 minutes and come back, because their deals are really simple. Let me come back with three options and let's go create the fourth. So this can be done in an hour over the course of a 3 or 4 day sales cycle. But on the big deals, the renewals, the $20 million renewals, we're starting to do this 9 months out. We're starting to estimate, and then a couple months of every time we're in front of people, we're validating and signaling. And then when we're getting, it definitely before the end, we want to start putting these solutions in front of them and then co-creating. And that's the thing. We're going from sort of competing with that one offer to co-creating with three. Now, the one downside to these is and you were kind of alluding to this earlier, if you overcomplicate these, my buddy Steve Forgione with VWR, if he's listening, the first time I presented to him about 15 years ago, Steve said, Dietmeyer, these are multiple confusing options. And that was when I first really started constructing them and bringing them out to the marketplace. So that is the one risk, is that you don't want to overcomplicate them to the point you were making earlier. The other thing that we already know is they're going to ask for the cheapest one with the most robust solution up front. And the point is, customer, all three of these are built interdependent with one another, right? I built one based on three, and then all the variables within one are all interdependent. So sure, we can move stuff around, but it's gonna move other variables. We cannot just do that one zero sum thing. So already know they're going to ask for the cheapest price with the most robust solution. So we already know that's going to happen, and we're ready for it.
So this has been a great lesson on how to create value based on all the information that we got. In the next episode, I want to wrap up this 4-part series with how to divide value, which is the term that I've heard you use at the very beginning, but I'm like, I'm going to hold my questions back on that for the next episode, because that's the whole topic of the next and final episode in strategic negotiation. So Brian, thank you for teaching me how to create value.
Thanks, Dan.